Tucker stood still, trying not to gag as the eight-legged lizard-like creature sniffed his boots like a malfunctioning vacuum. It made a gurgling noise as it bumped into him again. He exhaled slowly and muttered to himself, "If this thing breathes on me one more time, I am going to kick it into orbit." The other recruits around him, all different shapes and sizes, turned their attention elsewhere, but a few of them had noticeable reactions. One of the Dvars let out a strange hiccup that might have been a Laphagimar with a slick, dripping body twitched slightly, trying and failing to keep a straight face. The Carrions, with their angular forms and multiple eyes, gave no outward sign, but their spines shifted in a rhythm that looked suspiciously like amusement. In front of the line, Drill Sergeant Vanak loomed like a monolith, twice the height of any recruit. His entire body was covered in layers of obsidian black armor, like natural rock forged into muscle. His voice hit the air like a landslide, Oliver. "You are weak, pathetic, soft-bodied excuses for soldiers. You are not warriors, you are larvae. I would not trust you to guard a compost heap, let alone the borders of the Dominion." Tucker kept his posture, rigid jaw clenched. He had been insulted worse by his uncle during Thanksgiving back home in Nebraska. That man had a unique gift for yelling conspiracy theories between bites of mashed potatoes, so this didn't rattle him. Knack turned his head slowly, all six of his eyes locking onto Tucker. "You human, you. Come from a species known for inconsistent behavior. 1 minute competent, the next screaming into walls and falling over." "That sounds accurate," Tucker said without blinking. Behind him, a Durvar choked on its own saliva, or maybe that was just how they laughed. Knack's mandibles shifted slightly. The drill sergeant motioned to the course behind them. "We begin now with the obstacle test. If you survive, we will continue. If you do not, we save time. Proceed." The obstacle course stretched across a harsh, uneven canyon like a jungle gym designed by a sadist. Spike pits waited near vertical walls coated in sticky, translucent slime. There were rope bridges dangling over rivers that hissed with bubbling acid, and rotating platforms that spun at random. One section, called the Mind Fracture Gauntlet, had a sign written in 7 languages with a stick figure that looked like it was screaming and melting. At the same time, recruits began one by one. The first Carnexian had 6 legs and still managed to trip into the first pit. The Drvar didn't even make it to the first climb. The Gimar slithered past a few low barriers, but got wedged into a turn that required a more defined shape. Tucker watched them all carefully. His eyes scanned every movement, every failure. He studied how the walls tilted when stepped on, where the platforms paused, how long it took for the spinning arms to restart after a swing. Then he stepped up to the line. Human Vanak said again this time, "Quieter, you will fail, probably," Tucker replied, rolling his shoulders back. Then he ran. He did not pause. He did not wait for inspiration or encouragement. He just moved fluid and precise over the mud pit, like it was a puddle at home. Up the slime wall, his boots somehow finding purchase, as if gravity just decided to cooperate. At the top, he used a chain to swing forward, sailing past the next set of obstacles in a single leap. The recruits stared, Vanak's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Tucker dove under, spinning blades without flinching, ducked past, swinging logs like he had done it 1,000 times before. He ran with the kind of purpose that suggested this was a game he had played since childhood. At the acid bridge, he stopped just long enough to count the rhythm of the planks. Then he ran across in 3 calculated steps. When a platform spun mid-air, he caught the edge with one hand and used the momentum to fling himself forward. Then came the final section. The Mind Fracture Gauntlet. Tucker halted for a second. Knack barked from behind. "Do you hesitate, human?" "No, sir," Tucker shouted back. "Just calculating." He entered inside the gauntlet. The air shifted with strange pressure. Holograms flashed. Disorienting lights flickered on and off. Sounds came from every direction. Doors vanished. Floors rotated. The gauntlet was designed to tear the mind apart slowly with confusion and overload. Most recruits who entered crawled out vomiting 15 to 20 minutes later. Tucker walked out in 5 minutes, brushing dust from his sleeves. Knack did not blink. "Course complete," Tucker said flatly. "Did I miss a checkpoint?" No one responded. A Gmar let out a squelch. A Carrion clicked in disbelief. Vanak stepped forward slowly, his claws digging into the ground. You studied the course. Tucker shrugged. I watched the others go through. It was not that hard to reverse engineer the patterns. You memorized it. No, sir, I understood it. Silence stretched too long. Then Vanak roared. Reset the course, human will run it again. Backwards, Tucker raised an eyebrow, then smirked. You got it, sir. He ran it backwards and still beat every record by minutes. By the time he stood at the end of the course again, hands on hips, breathing like he had only taken a jog, the other recruits had not even reached the midpoint. Knack twitched slightly as if his code had hit an error. Tucker returned to formation. Sir, request permission to run it. Blindfolded tomorrow. Knack opened his mouth and closed it again. By morning, the entire base knew his name. Later that day, Tucker sat alone on a rusted supply crate, tossing a ration bar into the air. Around him, the barracks were silent. Not a single non-human wanted to meet his gaze. They all found reasons to reorganize their gear or stare at walls, pretending they were deep in meditation. Only Glar the Gaimar stayed nearby, technically always staring since he had no eyes, just an oozing blob of awareness. You are a statistical anomaly, Glar said, bubbling from his torso. Vence, thanks, Tucker replied casually. Flipping the bar again. I try your species is not the strongest, not the smartest, not the most adaptable on paper. Yeah, well, Tucker said, paper never fought my high school wrestling coach. At that moment, the barracks doors slammed open. Drill Sergeant Vanak stormed in like a thundercloud, with feet. Every step cracked the floor tiles. He marched straight to Tucker like the human had personally insulted his ancestors. Human Vanak said. Tucker stood up straight. Sir, report to Simulation Bay 4. Now someone beat my time already. Vanak's growl could have shattered. Steel Tucker shrugged and followed. 10 minutes later, he stood in a metallic chamber filled with Dominion officials. Some wore battle armor, others wore ceremonial robes. All watched him like he was about to explode. Tucker looked around. What's this one? More acid rivers, more spikes. Vanak stepped forward. Combat scenario, adaptive AI simulates real dynamic war zones. Best of the Dominion, designed to break even elite minds. Sounds like Tuesday. Tucker strapped into the neural rig. The interface wrapped around his head and everything changed. Now he was in a city under siege. Buildings on fire, drones circling, snipers on rooftops, raiders charging in all directions. Screams everywhere. He moved fast. He did not wait for orders or panic. He used the ruins as cover-stole weapons from fallen enemies and repurposed their drones. When a sniper pinned him down, he used debris to blind it. When surrounded, he rigged a fuel line to explode and vanished into smoke. The AI adapted. Tucker adapted faster. By minute 20, the Saudi officials were whispering. By minute 32 of them had left to recalibrate the system. By minute 40, he stood alone victorious, holding a hybrid rifle in the ashes of a battlefield. He removed the rig and looked around. So how did I do? The silence felt like it weighed tons. Vanak finally stepped forward. Explain yourself. What tactics did you use? Nothing fancy, Tucker said, wiping his brow. I stopped thinking like a soldier and started thinking like a human. Elaborate. You fight like a hive. Everything. Structured, same rhythm, same patterns. But humans, we grew up in chaos. Everything we do is improvising, surviving, making it work in the moment. You tried to break me. My mind has been breaking and rebuilding since I was a kid, trying to survive algebra in a trailer, with no AC and two brothers who used broomsticks as negotiation tools. One Dominion officer started taking notes. Are all humans like you? No, Sir, Tucker said. I am special, but not rare. Vanak turned to the others. Deploy him to live, drill. Zeta, sir. That is, I said, deploy. 2 hours later, Tucker stood on a real field with 20 other recruits. This time, no simulation, real terrain, real pain, real stakes. He ran first again, not to show off, to win. He used the terrain, distracted enemies with noise and reflections, stole weapons from confused recruits, turned panels into jammers, climbed structures with cables never meant to hold weight. He was not the strongest, but he was always 3 steps ahead. When it was over, he sat calmly on the flagpole watching. The others get carried away by medics. Vanak watched him from the edge of the field. Tucker waved. "Can I get a tougher challenge tomorrow, sir?" Knack did not respond. That night, as Tucker lay on his bunk, he heard a quiet voice. "Are you a weapon?" He looked up to see a carrion staring at him, wide-eyed. Tucker grinned. "No, I'm just a guy who paid attention in gym class." The morning after his legendary performance on the obstacle course, Tucker sat cross-legged on a rusted supply crate outside the barracks. The sky was still dark. The twin suns of Camp X-17 had not yet pierced the jagged silhouette of the cliffs. He balanced a smooth, flat rock on his head, eyes closed, arms resting on his knees, breathing slow and steady. A Croth recruit trudged past on his way to the morning lineup. He stopped to stare at Tucker for a long moment, then kept walking without a word, like he had just witnessed something not meant for normal eyes. Inside the barracks, silence stretched like a held breath. None of the non-human recruits spoke aloud. They avoided eye contact, not just with Tucker, but with each other. It was not fear exactly, but uncertainty, as if they were suddenly aware that they had been measured and found wanting. Only Glar, the sentient puddle of damp resignation, seemed comfortable. He had taken to following Tucker like a gooey shadow, his bubbling body never more than a few feet away. "You are not normal," Glar muttered from somewhere inside his gelatinous form. "Thanks," Tucker replied, still balancing the rock. "Statistically, you should not exist. On paper, lots of things should not exist," Tucker said. "Laughter is one of them, but here we are." Before Glar could respond, the sound of claws against metal echoed through the camp. Drill Sergeant Vanak appeared in the distance, moving with slow, measured steps. His usual stomp was absent, replaced with a strange calm, like someone handling explosives. Tucker opened one eye, saw him approaching, and stood up, gently setting the rock on the crate. Human Vanak said, "Sir, you are too. Report to Simulation Bay 4 immediately." Tucker tilted his head again. "Sir, someone beat my time already." Now 10 minutes later, he was back in the same cold room, neural rig hanging from the ceiling. Dominion officers lined the walls, their expressions unreadable. Some wore tactical armor, others long flowing robes that shimmered with circuitry. Their attention was focused entirely on him, like they were expecting him to grow extra limbs or melt through the floor. Tucker looked around. "You folks really need to work on your hospitality." Vanak stepped forward. "This is not training, this is evaluation. Adaptive combat scenario built by Dominion Command, level intelligence construct designed to simulate a wide range of combat environments, unpredictable dynamic situations, variable enemy responses." Tucker raised an eyebrow. "So a video game with consequences? No, this will push your cognitive limits beyond tolerance." "I see Tuesday vibes." He climbed into the neural rig, strapped in, and let the system take over. When his vision cleared, he was no longer in the sterile room. He stood in the middle of a city under siege. The sky burned red with smoke. Buildings crumbled on all sides. Drones buzzed through the air. Sniper fire crackled across rooftops, and alien soldiers surged through the streets. Tucker ducked behind a shattered wall, instinct kicking in. He was not panicking, he was calculating. He ran through alleys, climbed broken scaffolding, used the environment like an extension of his body. He stole weapons from fallen enemies, repurposed tech to throw off the simulation enemies, and used debris to blind a sniper. When he got cornered, he found a loose fuel line, turned it into a bomb, and slipped away in the chaos. 10 minutes in, the AI adapted. The enemies became faster, smarter, more coordinated. They flanked him, used terrain against him, took elevated positions, and tried to cut off his movements. Tucker adapted faster. He stopped reacting and started predicting. He led enemies into ambushes. He had no right. To survive, he caused collapses on purpose to control the battlefield. He jammed comms by overloading antennas with stolen components. By the 20-minute mark, the observers outside the simulation were whispering. By the 30-minute mark, 2 of them had left the room muttering something about calibration. By the 40-minute mark, Tucker stood alone in the burning city holding a hybrid weapon built from scraps, staring down the last enemy drone as it crashed into the ground. He pulled the rig off, his head, and looked around. "So how did I do?" No one spoke. Knack stepped forward, eyes narrowed. "What tactics did you employ?" Tucker wiped sweat from his brow, shrugged, and said, "I stopped thinking like a soldier and started thinking like a human." Explain you people think in formations and patterns. Soldiers move like pieces on a board, part of some big strategic plan, but humans, we grow up in chaos. No matter where you come from, everything is unpredictable. Family, school jobs, even the weather back home. My biggest challenge was surviving algebra in a broken-down classroom with no AC and two brothers trying to hit me with mop handles. One of the Dominion officers began taking notes. "Are all humans like you?" Vnak asked. "No, sir, I am one of a kind, but not rare." Vnak turned to the officers behind him. "Deploy him to live combat simulation zone." "Zeta, sir, that zone is." I said deploy. 2 hours later, Tucker stood at the edge of a massive training dome. Real terrain, real weather, real threats. Surrounding him were 20 other recruits from across the Dominion. Some looked confident, some looked nervous. A few avoided even looking in his direction. The objective was clear: control the zone, capture key points, disable enemy assets, survive. The match began. Tucker did not wait for instructions or coordination. He ran straight into the chaos. He used the terrain like he had grown up in it, threw rocks to draw attention away from himself, distracted two Devers and stole their weapons, lured a Croth into a pit trap, designed for training bots, climbed a tower using maintenance cables, and reprogrammed its panel to scramble everyone else's sensors. He did not overpower anyone. He outthought them. When the simulation ended and the smoke cleared, Tucker sat on the central control point sipping from a bottle of water like he was watching a game show. Vnak stood at the edge of the field claws, folded arms tight, face unreadable. Tucker waved at him. "Sir, request a tougher challenge tomorrow." Vnak said nothing. That night, Tucker lay on his bunk. In the dim lights of the barracks, he heard a whisper from the far side of the room. "Are you a weapon?" He opened his eyes and saw a carrion recruit watching him. Wide-eyed, Tucker smiled. "Nah, I am just a guy who listened in gym class." The next morning, before dawn, he was back outside, same spot, same crate, same rock on his head. This time, a few recruits lingered nearby. Not too close, but closer than before. Galar, as always, remained just behind him, gurgling faintly as if trying to understand the shape of the man in front of him. "You are becoming a myth," Galar said. "Nope, just a guy with good balance." Later that day, Vnak returned again. No fanfare, no orders barked, just presence. Tucker removed the rock and stood up. "Sir, you are to be transferred." "Transferred to what?" "To the Specialist Combat Doctrine Evaluation Unit." Tucker squinted. "Is that the lab with the cloaked folks who stare too long and never blink?" "Yes, sounds awful." "You are not being given a choice." "Can I bring my socks?" The shuttle to the SCDE facility took 4 hours. No windows, no stops. Just the hum of engines and the occasional flicker of red lights. Tucker spent most of the time whistling the theme song from an old Earth sitcom. The Dominion officers who met him wore black cloaks. Their faces were covered in metallic veils that shimmered with data. They scanned him 6 times before letting him step off the platform. Every detail of his biology was recorded. Inside the facility, everything pulsed softly like a living machine. The air smelled too clean, like nothing natural had ever entered this place. They led him into a circular chamber with one chair in the center. Dozens of elevated glass pods surrounded the room. Each held a Dominion mind strategist or telepath. Their thoughts echoed faintly like static in the air. A voice boomed from every direction. "Private First Class. Tucker, you are here because you defy classification." Tucker walked to the chair and sat. "Glad I could help you exhibit behavior inconsistent. With Dominion logic systems, you succeed where others fail with no measurable advantage of form or weaponry. This is not logical. Ever tried using logic on a raccoon stuck in your garage? Sometimes logic is not the tool you need." A new voice cut through, sharper than before. "We will begin the open thought simulation. You will not be given instructions. Your choices will shape the outcome." The simulation began again. This time, it was not a battlefield. It was worse. He stood in a massive diplomatic hall. 12 alien species argued over borders, resources, and justice. A single mistake could spark a war. Tucker stepped forward, smiled, and said, "So who brought snacks? It worked." Some aliens laughed. One was so startled it surrendered preemptively. Another offered him a trade agreement on the spot. He was not following protocol. He was making connections. In the next scenario, he was aboard a failing freighter drifting into a black hole. The crew was panicking and no one spoke the same language. The systems were alien to him. He used gestures, food, and pointing to establish command. He rerouted power using a bent fork and a packet of chewing gum. He taught one of the crew members how to play rock, paper, scissors to make decisions. The scenarios kept coming harder each time. A rebellion on a mining colony, a first contact with a color-based species, a prison where the guards were illusions, and the walls moved when you blinked. He escaped not with force, but with creativity. One time he staged a wedding between two rival gang leaders using nothing but a curtain and a broken extinguisher. When it ended, the room was silent again. "You are either our greatest asset or our greatest threat." Tucker stood, "Why not both?" at the door. Knack waited, arms crossed. "Your transfer is rescinded." "That was quick. You are returning to Camp X-17. Why the officers could not decide what to do with you. Half want to clone your brain, half want to lock it in a vault. I suggested something more practical, which is you will train the next generation of recruits. I am the instructor." "No, you are the benchmark." Tucker smiled. "Can I wear sunglasses and stand dramatically on cliffs?" "No." "Can I have a nickname like the human variable?" "No, still gonna call myself that in my head." Vanax said nothing. Tucker nodded. Challenge accepted. 3 days after his reassignment, Tucker stood once again at the edge of the infamous Camp X-17 obstacle course. It looked familiar, and yet everything about it was different. The air smelled the same, a mix of dust, metal, and that strange sour ozone that clung to Dominion tech, but the layout had changed completely. What used to be a brutal challenge was now a full-blown death trap. The acid river was wider now, dotted with floating platforms that shimmered out of existence without warning. The walls had grown higher and spun slowly with embedded spikes that sparked on contact. Pressure pads were scattered across the field, each one rigged to trigger different traps hidden within the terrain. The mind fracture gauntlet had expanded into something else entirely. It now stood as a tower of rotating rooms, shifting gravity zones, and neural destabilizers layered across multiple levels. The recruits lined up behind the starting line. Eyeing the course in stunned silence, species from across the Dominion were represented, each one with its own pride, its own training, its own assumptions about what war and strength meant. Some were plated, some furred others. Translucent, some had 2 legs, some had 8, and some floated without. Making a sound at the center of them, all standing with his arms crossed, and a gaze sharp enough to strip paint from steel, was Tucker. He was no longer private first class, no longer just a participant. Now he had a new designation, Tactical Benchmark Alpha Human 1. His presence at the head of the course sent a clear message. You are not here to pass, you are here to survive. Welcome to the new course. Tucker called out, his voice booming through the camp speakers. You will cry, you will question your life choices. You may hallucinate conversations with your ancestors, and if you are lucky, you will make it halfway. A recruit near the front, a hulking, four-eyed Kranis, raised a claw and asked, "So what is your role in this?" "Glad you asked," Tucker said, flashing a grin. "I will be running the course ahead of you." A murmur moved through the line like a small wave of disbelief. "No weapons," Tucker continued. "No tools, no gear. Just me, my boots, and gravity." The Kranis scoffed. "We are trained warriors. You are just—" But Tucker was already moving. He did not wait for the countdown or permission. He sprinted forward, launching himself into the chaos. The recruits watched as he leapt from the first shifting platform to the next, catching a rope that had not even been visible until it extended midair. He swung forward, launched himself upward, twisted in the air, and used the wall rotation to his advantage, ducking into a hidden alcove that bypassed the first spike cluster. When the second platform flickered out from under him, he rolled mid-fall, caught a ledge with one hand, and threw himself forward again. At the mind fracture, Gauntlet, he paused for a single breath, adjusted his footing, closed one eye, and walked through it like he was picking up cereal from the grocery store. The neural traps inside pulsed with flickering lights, disorienting pulses of sound, shifting floors and gravity reversals designed to turn minds into jelly. Tucker moved through it as if he had designed it himself. He emerged at the final section coated in grime and sweat, breathing steady and calm. He turned back to face the recruits still frozen at the start line. "Your turn," he said, then walked off toward his usual supply crate. Later that evening, the mood in the barracks had shifted. No one dared speak against Tucker now. He had crossed a line few could even approach. Several recruits now sat near him, not close but not as far away as before. Glar the Guimar remained the nearest, like a puddle that had grown attached to a shadow. "You are unreasonably fast," Glar said. "Not fast," Tucker replied. "Just used to chaos." That night, Drill Sergeant Vinak approached again, appearing as always without announcement, like a thundercloud with purpose. "Report," he said. Tucker stood 10, dropped in the first hour, 7 vomited in the neural maze. 1 tried to dig under it. "Progress," Vinak muttered. "Sir, if I may ask," Tucker said, "why redesign the course like this? Why make something no one can pass?" Vinak stared at the field where new recruits were being helped out by medics. "Because now they must adapt to you. The Dominion needs warriors who can think beyond instruction. You proved we were building hammers when we needed blades." Tucker folded his arms. "You think they will get there. Some will. Most won't. Good. Why? Because if everyone could do it, it would not mean anything." Nak tilted his head slightly. "You could leave? You know, the humans offered to recall you. Medal promotion parade." "I am not big on parades," Tucker said. "Besides, I like watching them squirm." A long silence hung. Between them, not uncomfortable, just weighty. "When I first saw you run that course, I thought you were a glitch," Vinak said, "a misfire of genetics. And now I think your species hides its sharpest weapons in plain sight." Tucker smirked. "Yeah, we do have a thing for surprises." Behind them, one of the new recruits screamed as a gravity shift tossed him into a foam pit filled with mildly aggressive training drones. Tucker looked over. "Tomorrow we start with basic brain rewiring." "You mean tactics?" "No, Tucker said, standing. "I mean teaching them how to lose and keep going." Nak said nothing. He just watched as Tucker walked away. The next few weeks unfolded like a controlled collapse. Recruits stumbled through every kind of failure imaginable. They fell, they cried, they broke bones and pride in equal measure. But slowly something shifted. They stopped hesitating at the start. They stopped relying on memorized paths. They began to observe, they began to anticipate. They learned not from instructions, but from errors, from failure. From watching, Tucker ran the course every morning in front of them. Not to show off, not to taunt, but to set the bar. He ran it in reverse. He ran it blindfolded. He ran it in the rain during sandstorms once even, with a Guimar stuck to his back as a challenge. He never yelled. He never explained. He simply led and insulted them creatively when they failed. "Come on," he shouted at one Croth, struggling on the acid planks. "My grandma can balance better than that, and she has never had legs. Watch the rhythm of the blades," he called to another. "Use your ears, not your fear." It was not just training. It was transformation. Then one day it happened. A recruit, a wiry insectoid, Carrion, made it through the entire course. Not fast, not clean, but made it. He limped across the finish line, breathing hard, half covered in goo and sparks. Eyes wide in disbelief, Tucker stood there waiting, handed him a bottle of water. About time, the recruit took it, wordless, still shaking. Behind them, Vinak and a team of officers watched silently. The moment was recorded, logged, and archived in Dominion records under a new classification, Tactical Evolution, triggered by Human Variable Field Designation. Course 1, not a test. A turning point. The sun had barely started to rise over Camp X-17 when the alarm sounded again. Not the usual drill siren, but the one that meant only one thing. Tactical evaluation mode had been activated and someone was about to suffer. Tucker stood beside the central tower arms, folded his boots. resting on a coiled rope left behind by a careless recruit. His eyes followed the movements of the new batch of trainees as they gathered near the starting line of the newly expanded course. Each one looked more nervous than the last. This group was different, more diverse. They came from outlying territories, places where Dominion control was still being tested. Some had never trained in gravity higher than half-Earth norm. Some had never seen combat outside of holographic simulations. And yet here, they stood ordered to run a course originally designed to break Tucker himself. He did not greet them with encouragement or even acknowledgement. He simply pointed to the course. Go. They hesitated. He sighed, stepped forward and looked them over. This course does not care who you are. It does not care about your status, your ancestry, or how many medals your family has. It only cares whether you can adapt. If you cannot, you will fail, and if you fail enough, you will be removed, not from the roster, from the system still. They hesitated. Tucker exhaled heavily. Fine. He sprinted into the course before anyone could react, vaulted the first set of barriers and ran the first sector in silence. Each movement was deliberate, efficient, not wasteful. He dodged spikes, sidestepped collapsing tiles, used momentum to roll through the shifting grav pads and then stopped. Halfway, turned back and shouted, "Now you go!" Reluctantly, they began one by one and the course responded immediately with a cruel sense of humor. A carrion misjudged a leap and hit the wall hard. A Gmar slithered too slowly over a friction pad and was launched into a mud pit. One recruit stepped into a decoy tile and vanished into a net trap that wrapped around them like a living bag. Tucker watched them all, made no move to intervene. Instead, he shouted instructions only when absolutely necessary. Use your left leg, not your right. There is a delay on that piston. You are thinking too loud. Stop that. They struggled. They fell. They screamed. Some cried, and Tucker ran it again. Then again. Then blindfolded with his hands tied and humming an old Earth tune. As he did by midday, half the recruits had quit. One had to be airlifted out, and 3 were so mentally disoriented they thought the floor was the ceiling. Tucker sat on a crate sipping from a ration pack, watching with a detached sort of focus. He did not smile. He did not mock. V-Nak appeared beside him quietly. You are pushing them hard. They need it. Some will break. Then they should break here, not out. Their V-Nak studied him silently. You know, they watch you like you are something else, something not real. I get that a lot. You ever think about why? Because I am not interested in their approval, only their improvement. The next day was worse. The course had changed again, reacting to Tucker as if the training system itself had become aware of him. New traps, new paths, new mind games. Even the color schemes shifted between phases and the gravity fields were now unpredictable in shape and intensity. Tucker mapped it in his head as he ran, memorized the changes, and incorporated them into his morning warm-up. The recruits began showing signs of awareness, picking up techniques from his movements, mimicking his footwork, watching how he breathed and how he positioned his weight before a jump. By the end of the week, something remarkable happened. One recruit almost made it. She was from a fringe colony not known for producing soldiers. Slender, quiet eyes, sharp as razors. She fell short at the final bridge, but got further than anyone else had since the redesign. Tucker pulled her from the impact zone and said 3 words. Do it again. She did. Then someone else got further, then another. The failure rate dropped, but so did the predictability of the results. Recruits were no longer failing in the same way. Twice Tucker watched someone invent a new path through the course, bypassing a segment completely by climbing over a support beam or using a gravity glitch to bounce higher. And for the first time since the course was rebuilt, Tucker felt something like satisfaction. Not pride, not joy, just confirmation. They were learning, but the Dominion did not exist in a vacuum, and news of the program began to spread. Other commanders requested to observe other species, sent representatives. Curious minds wanted to see the human benchmark for themselves. One day, a high-ranking Dominion official arrived accompanied by 3 mind strategists and a translator drone. They watched from a tower booth as Tucker addressed the recruits without script, without ceremony. "What do you fight for?" he asked them. They looked around confused. "Is it survival? Is it duty? Honor, territory? Glory? None of that matters unless you understand yourself. The enemy will not wait for your philosophy. They will act while you are still trying to explain your purpose. You are not here to become weapons. You are here to become chaos with intent." The official watched with narrowed eyes, then leaned toward Vanak. "He is destabilizing them. He is refining them." Vanak replied, "By teaching them to think like him, by teaching them to think at all." The official said nothing else. The next morning, Tucker found the course had changed again. The neural maze was gone, replaced with a shifting holographic environment that changed scenarios mid-run, from jungle to city ruins, to open terrain to zero-gravity space corridor. He ran it and adapted as always, but when he finished, he turned to find not just the recruits, but half the Dominion watching from the perimeter in silent awe. Vanak approached again. "You have become more than we intended. You thought I was a tool. I am not. We know what now? Now we see if the rest of them can catch up." Over the next month, things accelerated. Tactical scores across the camp. Rose incident reports fell. Recruits who would have dropped out instead pushed through because they had learned how to suffer constructively, how to fail forward. And every morning, Tucker ran that course in front of them, sometimes slower, sometimes backwards once. Upside down, using only his elbows and knees just to prove that no pattern was absolute. The Dominion filed a new report at the end of the training cycle. Subject Human 1 status, tactical benchmark, recommendation, continue exposure, limited containment, observe for pattern emergence. Tucker read the report himself, chuckled, and taped it to the wall of his bunk, with a note written under it in permanent marker. Still just a guy that night as he sat alone watching the stars. Glar approached silently, settled beside him like a puddle growing slowly outward. "I have calculated probabilities for your continued success." Glar said, "Hit me. Statistically, this should not be happening. Story of my life, do you believe you are making a difference?" "No, but they do. And sometimes that's enough." Glar said nothing more, and neither did Tucker. The stars flickered above them as the camp powered down for the night, and somewhere across the darkened field, the course adjusted again. Not to stop him, but to try and keep up. Weeks passed at Camp X-17, and the routine became its own kind of madness. Every morning before sunrise, Tucker stood at the edge of the ever-shifting course. The ground changed weekly, the platforms moved, the gravity twisted reality into something that bent both body and mind. But Tucker was always there. He would stretch silently, balance a rock on his head, or walk barefoot across the cold metal panels, like it was nothing. Every move was deliberate, not just for show, but for observation. He watched the wind, the lighting, the subtle delays in the course programming. He paid attention to every pattern, not to memorize, but to understand. By now, every recruit knew his name, not just in the camp, but across nearby outposts. His reputation traveled faster than official reports. He was no longer just a curiosity. He was a problem for some, a challenge for others, and a legend in the making. Some tried to mimic him. They copied his timing, his steps, even the way he squinted before a leap. Most failed because they were still thinking like trainees, like machines waiting for instructions. Tucker never waited. He responded before the situation even fully developed. He did not react, he adapted. And adaptation had become the new benchmark. Knack observed all of it quietly, from towers, from shadows, from behind mirrored visors. He no longer shouted orders, not unless absolutely necessary. The recruits had begun to self-regulate, driven by the standard Tucker had unknowingly set. There were days when Dominion officers from other facilities came to watch. They stood in silence, making notes, murmuring into data pads with nervous expressions. Some requested interviews with Tucker. Others tried to analyze his brain patterns. One team even attempted to measure the cortisol levels in his bloodstream. While he ran the course blindfolded, Tucker allowed it, once then told them he was charging a fee the next time. At night, he would sit near the supply crates, tossing pebbles into a tin cup beside his foot, or cleaning his boots with whatever cloth he could find around the campfire lights. The other recruits no longer avoided him. They listened, they asked questions. He answered only when he felt like it, and only ever with half a grin. "How do you not panic?" one of them asked. "I do. I just do it faster than you." Another asked how he memorized so much. I just remember the stuff that matters." They wrote his words down. They quoted him. They followed him through chaos. But it was never about Tucker. It was about the shift he caused. One night, a high-level Dominion strategist arrived unannounced, escorted by 4 guards and 2 telepaths. His cloak shimmered with rank. His voice echoed like steel and water. "You are Tucker. Depends who is asking. I represent those who govern tactical doctrine. You have disrupted expectations that tends to happen. What are your intentions to make them better than me? And why do you continue to lead without reward?" "I do get rewards," Tucker replied. The strategist blinked once. Slowly. "What kind of rewards?" "Satisfaction." The next morning, Tucker was called into a private review chamber within the command dome. He expected another simulation, another test, or maybe just another warning. Instead, he was met by a room of screens, each displaying footage from various Dominion training facilities. Some showed recruits struggling. Others displayed war games with brutal losses and poor coordination. A voice came from the wall. "Do you understand what you have done?" "Not really, I just run and shout a lot." "You have altered training metrics across 3 sectors. Doctrinal updates have been paused pending review. Your presence has initiated 5 major strategy shifts and caused 3 departments to reevaluate their predictive models. Sounds like a productive few weeks. You are an anomaly. I get that a lot. We have 1 final test, course simulation. Diplomatic challenge, environmental survival, social crisis, and unknown threat combined." Tucker leaned back in the chair. "So basically a Tuesday with paperwork." The room darkened. The simulation began. He stood in a town caught between 2 alien factions, one demanding justice, the other demanding resources. The local population spoke a language with no known translation. The buildings were on fire, the air was toxic, the sky changed color every 30 seconds. Within minutes, Tucker found the market square re-established communication, using hand signals and random objects like spoons and chalk. He negotiated a ceasefire by staging a trade fair, using scavenged goods, and managed to convince the locals to build barricades in the shapes of peace symbols, which confused both warring parties long enough to extract the injured. The next phase dropped him into a volcanic zone where the ground melted under his feet and the temperature fluctuated without warning. A small team of alien survivors followed him, all of them afraid, confused, and armed with outdated maps. He used thermal patterns to guide them. He marked safe spots using stones and smoke. He built a signal tower, using melted scrap and old drone pieces, and activated a distress beacon by short-circuiting an enemy comms unit. Third phase, he was aboard a drifting freighter with no life support systems and a crew suffering from psychological breakdowns due to prolonged exposure to deep space anomalies. He told them stories, real ones, some not so real. He taught one how to whistle another, how to play rock, paper, scissors. He built trust by eating first, drinking first, walking through doors. First, every action sent a message, I'm still here. So are you fourth phase? He faced isolation. No enemies, no threats, just silence. 1,000 rooms empty and shifting. He walked, he thought, he laughed alone. And after what felt like a year but was likely only an hour, he found the exit. The final phase placed him before a panel of Dominion minds, each demanding explanation, each offering a different path forward. He said nothing at first, then asked a simple question. What are you afraid of? They did not answer, so he told them, You're afraid because I don't follow the rules you built for others. You are scared because I make it work anyway. You want to contain me, but you need me more than you understand. They ended the simulation. When he opened his eyes, Vnak stood at the door again, silent, unreadable. That was fast. The results were faster. So what now? They cannot agree what to do with you. I figured you are being reassigned again. To where back here, Tucker laughed softly. Why? Because no one can figure you out and someone has to teach them how to think like you. I am not a teacher. You are not an instructor. You are the standard. That day, Tucker returned to the field. This time he did not run first. He stood at the end of the course and watched as the recruits stepped forward slowly, one at a time. He said nothing as they fell, as they rose, as they cursed and screamed and struggled. Then one of them made it, barely covered in dust, shaking, breathing like they were dying. Tucker handed them a water bottle and said 2 words, "Do better." From that day forward, he was not just the benchmark. He was the system. When the Dominion first designed its training protocols, it believed in structure. Every simulation, every obstacle, every combat scenario followed patterns, measurable steps with clearly defined success rates. It had worked for years, built armies, forged unity, but then came the human. Tucker changed everything without meaning to. He was not faster or stronger or more intelligent in the traditional sense, but he adapted, and adaptation was something the Dominion did not know how to teach. In the months following his reassignment, the impact of his presence spread far beyond Camp X-17. The reports began with metrics. Recruits at the camp were showing unusual growth, not just physically, but mentally. Those who observed Tucker regularly improved in unexpected areas: tactical prediction, problem solving, emotional resilience. Other camps tried to mimic the results. They brought in human trainers, loaded Earth-based philosophy into the training. Matrix ran cultural simulations, but none of it worked. The issue was not the content, it was the method. Tucker did not teach like the Dominion expected. He did not distribute instructions or diagrams. He demonstrated, then let others fail in the same space and learn from the collapse. At the core of it all was the course. What had once been a punishing test had become a living environment. It updated almost daily, reacting not only to the recruits, but to Tucker himself. Platforms moved differently based on his speed. Gravity fields bent to challenge his timing. Neural traps rewired themselves the moment he figured them out. Every morning he walked the course alone. He did not run it anymore. Not always. Instead, he walked it with his hands behind his back, scanning the layout like a teacher preparing a lesson. His silence became part of the curriculum. Then he would run it once. One complete pass at full speed or full disadvantage, blindfolded or backwards or crawling, depending on the day and after. That he would step aside and let the others go. He rarely gave feedback. He only watched. And the recruits followed. They learned not to memorize, but to perceive, not to overcome, but to adjust. They started seeing the course as a conversation, not a battle. And in time, something happened. They stopped fearing it. The first full pass came from a recruit no one expected, a thin Gmar who barely spoke and struggled with every physical requirement. But they watched. They observed Tucker for weeks and tried again. And again, and one day they made it. Not quickly, not gracefully, but completely. The camp erupted. Even Tucker nodded once. It was all the approval anyone needed. More passed after that. A Carrion who had nearly dropped out in the first week, a Dervar who had failed 15 times, a Kranis who had mocked the course at first, then trained every night until their claws bled. Each one different, each one improved. The Dominion was watching, and they were nervous. The reports shifted from curiosity to concern. Recruits trained under Tucker showed unpredictable growth. They became less obedient, more inquisitive, more willing to challenge direct orders when they sensed a flaw in logic. In most armies that was dangerous. In the Dominion, it was treason. But these recruits were also more effective in the field. They won skirmishes with fewer losses, navigated unknown terrain, faster completed missions that previous squads had failed. It became hard to argue with the results. And so the Dominion sent inspectors, not just scientists and tacticians, but political observers, cloaked figures whose presence chilled every room they entered. They watched Tucker closely. He ignored them. They recorded his words, his movements, his interactions. He noticed he simply did not care. One night, a cloaked observer confronted him at the edge of the course. "You are creating instability. I am creating resilience. You are undermining the chain of command. I am reminding them that the chain is only as strong as its weakest link. What do you want? I want them to survive. That is not your role. I do not care." They filed their reports and returned to their dark towers. Tucker went back to the course. One morning he arrived to find it changed more than usual. The field had doubled in size. The air shimmered with static. The neural gauntlet pulsed with unpredictable light. The recruits gathered quietly. Tucker stood at the edge and studied it. Then he turned to the group and said, "Today we do not run the course. Today you change it." The silence that followed was deep. "You mean break it?" one of them asked. "I mean shape it. The rules are not fixed, not anymore." He stepped back and waited. At first they hesitated. Then someone picked up a loose wire and moved it. Another adjusted a balance plate. They reprogrammed a segment of the wall, redirected a gravity panel, rerouted a section of the maze using logic that had nothing to do with protocol. They were not destroying the course, they were evolving it. And Tucker let them. Hours passed and the course was different. Worse in some ways, but better in others, more confusing, less predictable. Tucker ran it once to test the new layout and failed. He hit the floor laughing. "Good," he said, "now we are getting somewhere." That night he sat at the edge of the camp, watching the sky. Mac joined him after a long silence. "You failed the course about time, right? You did that on purpose." "No, I tried to win, and you are not upset." "I am glad." Mac stared at him. "We used to train them to survive. Now they train to surpass that. Is the goal. It is dangerous, it is necessary. What happens when they stop listening to anyone? Then we better make sure we are worth listening to." More time passed, and eventually one of the original recruits became a trainer. Then another. Tucker watched each one carefully but never interfered. The course changed again and again, always more complex, always closer to the chaos he had once mastered. But now it mastered no one. And that was the point. Tucker never asked for rank, never accepted medals or titles. He was offered a command post on Earth. He declined. He was offered honors by the Dominion. He laughed. He stayed where he was because the job was not done. Not until they no longer needed him, and someday they would, but not yet. That night, as he walked the edge of the course alone, he paused to look at the stars one more time. He whispered to no one, "I was never the weapon, I was the spark." Behind him, a recruit tripped over a neural loop and screamed. Tucker smiled. Still learning goodbye. Now the name Tucker was no longer just spoken in the dusty camps or whispered in the recruit barracks across the Dominion. It had made its way into files, presentations, meetings, and reports that flowed between high-level Dominion leadership. The word benchmark no longer referred to a system standard or metric. It now meant one thing: the human tactical benchmark, Alpha. Human one. The course had evolved beyond anything originally imagined. The system used to be made of steel, spikes, acid pits, holograms, and logic. Traps. Now it had taken on the properties of something more alive. The environment itself shifted with mood and memory, adapting to the fears and strengths of each recruit. Not because it wanted to destroy them, but because it wanted them to grow. Every failure was recorded, every success was reviewed. The result was not a simulation, it was a crucible. And Tucker stood at the center of it all, not because he demanded to, but because no one else could. Every morning before dawn, he walked the edge of the field. The lights above flickered in and out of alignment. The neural maze rebooted each hour to prevent pattern memorization. The terrain was now so complex it required an updated satellite feed just to map the starting zones. He stood there silent. Then he turned to the recruits. The new ones had never seen him run, only heard stories. The older ones had memorized his movements, tracked his progress, like fans watching an ancient sport. But Tucker no longer ran the course for glory. He ran it to teach. Sometimes he failed on purpose. Sometimes he let himself fall into a trap just to show them how to recover. Sometimes he stood at the end and pointed to a section of the course and said, "One of you will change that today." And they did. He encouraged mistakes as lessons, not errors. He applauded effort over result. He laughed at missteps and turned slips into strategy. One morning he was approached by a recruit different from the others, smaller, quiet, with eyes too wide, and a posture that suggested they were used to apologizing for existing. "Why do you still run the course?" they asked. "Because it is the only thing in this system that does not lie." "What do you mean? The course does not care what species you are. It does not care where you are from or what you believe. It only cares whether you are willing to keep going. And what if I can't? Then you rest, and when you are ready, you try again." The recruit nodded slowly. That day, they reached the halfway point for the first time. No cheers, no applause, just a quiet nod from Tucker and a bottle of water. It was more than enough. In the weeks that followed, Tucker began rotating sections of the course management to the senior recruits. They modified zones, added creative traps, built structures designed to teach specific lessons. Some created puzzles with no clear answers. Others created walls that could not be climbed. But every part of the course taught something real, and that was the legacy. One evening, a diplomatic envoy arrived from a neutral system, an observer known only by designation and title. They walked the perimeter with silent steps, recorded everything through retinal capture, and said nothing until the end. Then they approached Tucker, who was sitting on a crate, eating something that resembled jerky but probably wasn't. They asked, "Are you the reason these recruits succeed?" Tucker wiped his hands and looked up. "No." "Then what is failure?" The envoy tilted their head. "They have failed more times than they can count. I just made sure they had a place to do it without dying. You do not fear their independence. I encourage it. You do not mind when they disagree with your instructions. I hope they do. And what is your reward?" Tucker smiled at that question. When one of them gets up after falling for the 50th time, when one of them says, "I figured it out," when one of them no longer needs me. "That is enough." The envoy nodded slowly and walked away. They filed a report later with the Dominion Central Archive. Field Observation Tactical Benchmark Program. Human model results: unpredictable success rate. High recommendation: maintain open observation. Status unknown: variable may be essential to long-term reform. Back at Camp X-17, another cycle ended and another began. The cycle of failure, learning, adaptation. Success. And Tucker watched it all. He saw the spark in their eyes when a lesson finally landed. He saw the grit when someone stood despite every bruise, cut, and humiliation. He saw the beginnings of something that went beyond rank or species. He saw hope. Because somewhere in the mess of drills and traps and impossible odds, they stopped trying to become weapons. They became thinkers. They became leaders. They became more than what the Dominion had tried to mold. And Tucker knew something they had not figured out yet. The strongest force in the galaxy was not a fleet, not a weapon, not even a strategy. It was the ability to adapt, to break, and still keep moving. Just like life, real life outside of simulators and expectations, where people fail every day, where things go wrong, where plans crumble, and all you have is grit and the will to try again. So when someone asked him one evening, while staring at the stars above the camp, what the point of it all was, he answered without hesitation: to prove that failure is not the end. It is just the first step that counts. And in that moment, the human benchmark was no longer just a title. It was a reminder, a lesson, a legacy, that in the heart of the impossible, through the fire, in fear and failure, we rise not. Because we are perfect, not because we are programmed, but because we choose to try again every single time. And that is what makes us unstoppable.